Hi. So good evening. My name is Dr. P. I'm the founder and president of Crimson Coaching, and this is the world premiere of Neuroscience for Learning. I'm really excited to be presenting this for Jericho Public Library. I want to thank them for sponsoring the talk and thank Ms. Simmons for inviting me and all of you for being here on what is a beautiful night in May. So just a couple of introductions. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and who I'm not, and then I'm going to ask who you are. So while I'm telling you who I am, if you'd like to put into the chat.
I'm sorry, we don't have the chat open.
Oh, okay. No
And
worries.
I can't open it because this is already in progress.
Sure.
So unfortunately, I hope that, I should have asked you ahead of time, but hopefully that's not going to be a big...
Not at all. I'm always just a little bit curious to see, how old the students are, sort of where they are in their school career, but that's totally fine. So just so that you guys know a little bit about me, I used to be a teacher, high school teacher. I taught at various schools on Long Island, like Great Neck North High School, as well as private school in the city, Horace Mann School, and in Westchester, Scarsdale High School. Now I do still teach classes, but as a part-time history professor for the City University of New York. I happen to be a Harvard grad and a lifelong student. And the reason why I find that kind of relevant is because this is all about neuroscience for learning, how to really use the techniques I'll be showing you and teaching you about to become a better student. So some of them I can sort of tell you that I have used and still continue to use as a lifelong student. But my main job now is running Crimson Coaching and being the head coach of Crimson Coaching, where I do test prep for tests like the SAT, ACT, and I'm a college essay coach and college counselor and an academic tutor. You will see that I did not list neuroscientist among my skills, and I'd like to be very upfront about that. So none of the advice that I am giving you is medical advice. Of course, please check with your physician before you implement any of the strategies that I'm going to tell you. But one of the things that I love to learn about is the brain, and I have been learning about it for several years now. And that's how I sort of feel, as a teacher who's learned about this on my own, qualified to teach you about it too. So the doctor in Dr. P is a PhD in history. And as a historian, I really like to share my sources when I give talks. So some of the sources you may recognize, like Dr. Sanjay Gupta from CNN. He's also an author and a neuroscientist himself. Others are equally well known in the world, especially of adolescent psychiatry and neuropsychiatry. This is Dan Siegel, who's out in UCLA. And I'll be also relying on Andrew Huberman, whose picture will come up in a few slides, who's at Stanford University School of Medicine. But I also rely on my own experience teaching. These are a couple of my students from Scarsdale High School when they graduated. I had much longer hair then, and I can't believe I used to have that much hair. One of the things that I do teach is also yoga, and that relates because some of the breathing techniques I'll be teaching you about actually have basis in neuroscience, but also go back much, much further as yogic disciplines. And then, of course, as I mentioned, my own experience as a student at Harvard. This happens to be the dorm where I lived. So those are all the sources for today's talk. So first, let's talk about what is neuroscience. And this is one of the beautiful drawings by Santiago Ramón y Cajal, who was a Spanish scientist. He was the first Spaniard to win a Nobel Prize, and he's considered the father of neuroscience. And the definition of it is any or all of the sciences which deal with the structure or function of the nervous system and brain. And one part of the sort of brain that is interacting with the outside world is our eyes, that we're going to learn quite a bit about, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. And the sciences, I have a little asterisk here. Those sciences include physiology, anatomy, molecular biology, developmental biology, meaning sort of how you are from in the womb all the way to baby, child, teen, adult, older adult, and so on. Cytology, which is the study of cells, physics, and chemistry. So it's a very multidisciplinary field. And as young people who might be applying to college, you might be interested to know that neuroscience is increasingly being offered as a major or at least a minor at colleges, because in the past 10 years, maybe 20, going out a little bit farther, there have been such tremendous increases in our knowledge in neuroscience. And I find a lot of my own students, for instance, I coached a student for her essays to college. She's the one who first told me about Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who drew this picture. So there's a lot of exciting developments lately in neuroscience. Interestingly enough, neuroscience has not really penetrated the field of education, and you would think that it would, because after all, we primarily learn, not exclusively, but primarily use our brain in order to learn new things. So both at the K-12 level, as well as at the university setting, teachers and professors are not really taught anything about neuroscience, which I find, unfortunately, really kind of striking. If you want to check out more about this, there's an interesting article in edweek.org about why teachers should be taught this. But if you're not learning these things in school, it's not really the fault of your teachers, because they aren't learning it in their teacher preparation programs. Your brain is connected to the rest of your body, and your body, of course, is connected to the rest of the world. And so because of all those connections, Dr. Dan Siegel at UCLA has come up with a conception of what he calls the healthy mind platter. And this is not just for students, by the way, this is for adults and everyone. He believes that each of us should spend some time every day on one of the all seven activities, sleep, physical activity, focusing, which is basically work, connecting with others, playing, downtime, and time in, which is sort of like a spiritual looking inward. Now, I'm going to be very honest with you and tell you, I personally find it very hard to get in all seven of these activities every single day. However, I would say realistically, it's important to have in the course of a week to be able to do that. Some of them, like, of course, sleeping, hopefully we do every day, and hopefully also physical activity, things like that, and connecting. Others we might not have time to do every day, but certainly within the course of a week. And you don't need to consider doing them all separately. You can hit multiple pieces of the platter with a single activity. So I'm using this picture of my very smart and beautiful niece, who I recently took to Adventure Park. I have no stock in Adventure Park in Wheatley Heights, but I think it's an amazing place, not just for the body, but also for the brain, because you are balancing, you're using your strength, agility, and things like that. You're in nature. And by the way, it's also really great if you can do some of these activities in nature, like, maybe playing and physical time. And of course, we went to Adventure Park together. So we were connecting there too. So let's look at different parts of that healthy mind platter. Sorry about that. The first one we're going to look at is sleep. And the word circadian has to do with daily, right? It's just sort of what our daily rhythms are like. And it's really important if you want to have a brain that functions in its optimal state to not only get enough sleep, but to get quality sleep. And one of the ways you could do that is by waking up and going to sleep at generally the same time each day. And I know that many teenagers find this really difficult because most of you are getting up way too early because it's natural for adolescents' circadian or daily rhythm to kind of shift later. And so you naturally want to wake up later and go to bed later. And so that means that oftentimes on the weekends, you are maybe sleeping until noon in order to make up for some of the sleep that you are missing during the week. That is actually really terrible for your sleep-wake cycle, that sleep binging. And so to the extent possible, if you can try to retrain yourself, I know it's very difficult, but to try to retrain yourself to get to bed, like say if you have to wake up at 6, to get to bed at 10 so that you can at least get 8 hours of sleep every night. Most teenagers, the average teenager actually needs 9 1/4 hours of sleep on average. That means some need 10 or more. Some teens need less. But I find I've never met a teen who's actually getting 9 1/4 hours of sleep. So if you could at least get 8, that would be fantastic. Many teens have trouble falling asleep, especially if you're trying to go to bed at what seems to you an abnormally early hour. And so you might try different apps to put you in a more relaxed state. I've tried the Reverie app. I'm not a fan of it, but the scientist who we're going to meet in a moment likes that one quite a bit. I prefer the free app Insight Timer, which has probably tens of thousands of different meditations and music that you can filter by length of time, by gender of the speaker, and they can often really help put me in a more sleepy, drowsy state of mind. So I recommend that. And then there's also a discipline of yoga, which is Yoga Nidra. And there's also, you could search for Yoga Nidra on Insight Timer, or you can also search for Yoga Nidra on YouTube. And I particularly sort of like the ones that are about 20 to 30 minutes. They kind of help make me drowsy when I can't fall asleep. You also want to keep your bedroom cool and dark and layer blankets that you can remove. And if you happen to go to bed at the same time every night or more or less, you should feel like it's very normal to be very alert about an hour before your natural bedtime. Don't freak out. That doesn't mean that you should, start, doing all different kinds of things. It's a normal cycle and it should pass. So a lot of these tips that I'm sharing with you right now come from Andrew Huberman, whose podcast, the Huberman Lab podcast, I love. I think it's a great source of information. He himself is a neurobiologist and an ophthalmologist at Stanford School of Medicine. And as you could see, this was a great tweet he put out. Best stress relief, sleep. Best trauma relief, sleep. Best immune booster, sleep. Best hormone augmentation, sleep. Best emotional stabilizer, sleep. So sleep is really the foundation of our health. In addition, light can play an extremely important role in how well we sleep. And Dr. Huberman recommends viewing sunlight by going outside within 30 to 60 minutes of waking. And you don't need to go outside for very long. If it's sunny out, you could go out for just a couple of minutes. If it's cloudy, you might need 10, maybe even 20 minutes. But this is very important to signal to your brain it's time to wake up. And unfortunately, if you say, well, I'll just turn on all the lights, it's actually not a great substitute. The amount of light, or which is measured in lux, that comes from the sun, even on a cloudy day, is of such a bigger order of magnitude than comes from even very bright lights in your home, that going outside is really the best thing to kind of start to regulate your sleep-wake cycle. In addition, in order to begin to signal to your brain it's time to go to sleep, you want to go outside late in the afternoon. Even now, because our days are getting much longer, might be good, maybe 6, 7 o'clock, when it's getting close to, June, because the low angle of the sun getting into our eyes signals to our brain it's time to start shutting down. Very important, you want to avoid viewing overhead bright lights between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. because that will artificially signal to your brain, stay awake, when you should be getting down into sleep. You might say, well, what the heck should I do? It's actually not as complicated as it might sound. So you could, if there, I, for instance, now, because I'm on camera, I have adult overhead lights above me in the ceiling, right? Normally, though, I shut all of those off, even starting around 4 or 5 p.m. I try not to have lights over my head. Instead, I have desk lamps or lamps that are on low tables, because again, that stimulates that low angle of the sun. So it's not terrible. And you can definitely, there are extreme people who only live by candlelight. That might be a little bit much. But especially important is, one of the big lights for many of us is our computer light, right? And we have certain filters that stop, of course, the blue light that wakes us up. But even with that blue light dimmed, and just having red light, which is more the light of late afternoon and evening, that can still, the light from the computer can still wake us up. So if you want to go to bed by 10 p.m., I would say really stop using any screen by 9 p.m. and just, read or take a bath or whatever in order to get that sleep under control. So Dr. Siegel does not actually have nutrition as part of his Healthy Mind platter. So this is all Dr. P, but I think it's very important what we put into our bodies in order to feed the brain. So in terms of what can keep us awake, again, in terms of disrupting sleep, you really want to avoid caffeine within 8 to 10 hours, and maybe, sorry, this little parenthesis should be before maybe even 12 to 14 hours if you're very caffeine sensitive, in order to be able to fall asleep by the time you need to get to sleep. Carbohydrates have been kind of the persona non grata of the keto world and low carb diet and high protein diet. That's great if you're trying to build muscle and perhaps if you're trying to lose weight. But as long as you're normal weight and that's not your goal, eating complex carbohydrates like whole wheat pasta or, potatoes or quinoa with brown rice or something like that with dinner is great because they'll make you feel sleepy. And so that's really a good time to eat that. In terms of other things that you can eat that are really nutrition for your brain, anything with antioxidants, and you'll often hear what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So berries, beans, apples, asparagus, veggies, especially magnesium-rich spinach, nuts, and Swiss chard, things that are rich in zinc. And, whether you're a vegan or vegetarian or carnivore, there's something there for you. Salmon and other things that are rich in omega-3s. And in particular, and this is kind of a new one, there's a lot of research now being done about the gut-brain connection. So our guts, from our stomach through our intestines, are filled with different bacteria. It's a whole microbiome. And the more sort of good probiotics we can have in our gut, things like that come from fermented foods like yogurt and kimchi and pickles, not the kind of pickles that are on the regular shelf in the supermarket, but the kind that have to be refrigerated. Sauerkraut is another big one. All of those things have great amount of probiotics in them that also beneficially affect the brain. Now, Dr. Siegel did mention the importance of physical activity in his Healthy Mind Platter. Children between the ages of 6 and 17, which I'm assuming that most of you are, need 1 or more hours a day of moderate to vigorous aerobic exercise. So swimming, bike riding, running, playing soccer, basketball, something like that. Some kind of muscle strengthening exercises. So you don't have to, go to the gym or anything like that. It could also be yoga or using your own body weight about 3 days a week. Bone strengthening activities about also 3 days a week. So that could be also running, something like jumping rope, things that'll make your bones nice and strong. Now, this doesn't sound like brain stuff at all, but believe it or not, physical activity is really important for the brain. These activities don't just reduce your risk of depression, and I would argue that it's really hard to learn to your potential, to your full potential, if you're depressed or if you're anxious. And they also improve thinking and memory skills, especially among children and adolescents whose brains are still forming. The brain benefits of physical exercise have been studied again and again. If you just Google children exercise brain, you will get tons of not just popular sources, but also peer-reviewed Google Scholar results as well. Their students who get more exercise are shown to have better academic performance. Their memories are better. They have more attention and focus, and they're also better at problem solving. And, a lot of students might think, oh, well, I need lots of cardio for that, for my heart and brain. Both of those things are important, motor skill activities as well. So trying to think, perhaps like a sport like lacrosse or tennis, you're using more of your motor skills than, running. It's anything where you're catching or throwing a ball, things like baseball or football. Those activities will improve overall brain function. But since those different activities activate different parts of your brain, you really need both of them in order to make the most of the brain exercise connection. And that's the source. That's that study there. So neuroplasticity is a word that sort of means the ability of our brains to change shape. Dr. Huberman, the one with the beard, has a neuroplasticity super protocol. And there are 9 steps that I'm going to share with you. I've kind of tried to make them as simple as possible. And if you are interested in kind of going into the weeds and a little bit more detail, I do encourage you to go to his website. I think it's Huberman Lab Podcast, maybe .com or .org, I'm not sure. And this comes from his second newsletter, and so you can download that there. The first step is, if you want to go and learn something new, and you will be changing your brain, right? That is engaging in neuroplasticity. So let's say, for example, I'm going to teach myself a new language, okay? I love languages. I speak French, Spanish. My Italian's like this. So let's say I want to pick Italian back up and get even better at it, okay? First of all, my brain needs to be alert prior to my learning session. And Dr. Huberman has a protocol, which I find a little confusing, but it reminds me a lot of something I learned as a yoga teacher. So I am going to look a little silly to you, probably, but it's all in the name of teaching. So in yoga, we call this breath Kapalabhati, or skull shining breath. And I think they do that because they call it that is because you are bringing so much oxygen into your brain by doing this. And basically, you can think about, I like to put my hands on my belly and I inhale deeply through my nose. And then I'm going to do short, sharp exhalations through my nose like this. And at the same time, you can't see my belly here, but my belly is kind of pumping in so that the air is automatically expelled through my nostrils. I will tell you, it's very difficult to do during allergy season because of what might come out of your nose. And yes, as I was teaching 9th grade once, and I was teaching my 9th grader to do this, something did come out of my nose. So, nevertheless, so again, I'll show you the breath one more time. And generally, I like to do it for at least, 5 to 10 seconds if I'm just starting out. So here we go. So if you can, once you start doing that, you can increase it all the way up to 30 seconds, I would say. I do recommend sitting down when you do this. Sometimes some people can get lightheaded. And if you get lightheaded, then definitely stop doing it, okay? But that tremendous amount of oxygen that you're bringing in through conscious breathing like that will help get you alert prior to learning. Secondly, you want to focus your brain by focusing your eye. And there's a very kind of specific protocol for this, so I've kind of laid out the steps here. First, you want to stare at the wall in front of you, at a screen, or at an object, maybe like a candle or something, for 30 to 60 seconds. And I recommend kind of setting a little timer on your phone, maybe start with 30 seconds and then eventually, go up to 60 seconds. It's going to seem very uncomfortable. And you should, by the way, also feel free to blink while you're doing this. This discomfort or effort will release a neurochemical called acetylcholine in your brain that will help you focus. Then move into your task. But at the beginning of your task, know that it's very natural for your attention to flicker in and out. Don't stop. Keep going. Know that waning attention is natural, okay? But help yourself through this waning attention by doing things like keeping your phone off. So for example, my phone is turned off right now, okay? I don't want friends or family texting me during this time. And while I'm learning something new, like Italian, might be good for me to do that too. If you don't trust yourself, keep your phone out of the room. If you're working on your computer, try to have as many tabs as possible minimized or shut down. I will tell you that obviously, since COVID, I tutor 100% online. So for more than 2 years, I've conducted my business with students online. And sometimes I ask them to share their screen with me. And I'm shocked by the number of tabs that teenagers keep open all at one time. And it's not just one student. I find that every student is like this. Your brain is constantly flickering in between different things that you need to, that are on your screen. Reduce that tension and that distraction by minimizing or shutting those tabs down. And maybe you even want to shut the internet off if you're, say, writing a paper, and maybe you're actually using, notes that you've taken in hard copy, or you have an article printed out. Maybe you just use Microsoft Word rather than Google Docs. I know it seems weird for your generation to compose in Google Docs, but again, if keeping the internet and your Wi-Fi on is just going to have things pinging at you, that's going to make it very hard for you to sustain your attention on one task. Next, try to generate the maximum number of repetitions that you safely can. So obviously with Italian, it's not going to be, unsafe for me to say io parlo, tu parli, right? That's not unsafe. But let's say I'm learning tennis and I have a rotator cuff tear because I'm old. It might not be safe for me to try to serve, more than 20 times in a row because I might hurt my shoulder. So again, you want to try to do as many repetitions of whatever it is you're trying to learn safely. Oops, sorry about that. So this is a little bit more of our super protocol for neuroplasticity. The fourth step is to embrace errors. Errors activate neural circuits that increase your alertness, right? So if I say I was serving, right? I'm a lefty, so say I serve, and my serve goes into the net, which it probably would because I'm not very good at tennis. That is going to increase my alertness more than if, I did a Serena serve right over, right over the net. Okay. When I'm good at something, that doesn't stick in my mind as much as when I'm bad at something. But when you make an error, then that sticks in your brain and that'll allow you to perform better next time. And I love this. I don't know if you guys know what that game is, but it's called from a game called Pac-Man that was out when I was a kid in the 80s. And even though it says game over, which, you got when the ghost ate you 3 times, every time you were gobbling up the little pellets, you kind of understood, oh, maybe I shouldn't go this way. Maybe I should go that way. It's just our brains learn the same way. And after you've generated the maximum number of repetitions that you can, you want to pause and do nothing for about 10 seconds at random intervals, maybe about every 2 minutes or so, but not exactly. So you could do, minute 30 one time, 2 minutes, 10 seconds another time. Those micro rest periods will engage the same patterns of neural activity in your hippocampus and cortex. And these are the areas of the brain that are involved in learning and memory. They'll engage those same patterns that were engaged while you were learning, but 10 times faster. So resting after you're trying to learn something at regular intervals help you learn even more. I'm not sure whether there are any parents in the audience tonight, but number 6 will be especially important, I think, for parents. But as students, as you become more independent, self-directed learners, especially when you go away to college, you can think about utilizing rewards, and we'll talk about that more in a second. You want to think about not having any really intense learning bout last more than 90 minutes. And I think, depending on how old you are, and I'll go into that a little bit more, you may even want to make that even briefer. And then after your learning bout, and this is different than the micro rests during the learning bout. This is really after your learning session is over, you want to rest. So let's go to each one, 6, 7, and 8 here. Parents, random intermittent rewards can increase drive and motivation. So what do we mean by random? Well, I'll give you like a example, right? When I was younger, when we got good report cards, my dad would take us out to Friendly's for ice cream after a good report card. That was not a particularly random event, though, because it happened every single time we got a good report card. One might say that if we never knew whether we would get taken to Friendly's or not, that might have increased our drive and motivation to get a good report card even more, because we wouldn't be sure if we would be getting that Friendly's ice cream cone. Now, for younger kids, I'm using that just as an example. A term, a quarter of a school year is still a pretty long time. So you can apply this perhaps to daily. Maybe you don't give your child their treat every single time they do something well, but maybe make it intermittent so that they can then have more motivation to get that reward. And if you could also do this for yourself, right? Say for me with my Italian, for me, it's often a struggle to find time to do these things. So for me, it might be, well, if I commit to actually studying my Italian every day for a week, maybe some weeks I'll get myself a manicure, but maybe some weeks I won't. Okay. In terms of the no more than 90 minutes, you definitely want to not do more than 3 of those 90-minute bouts in one day, which is really a lot, I think, especially for students in the K-12 space. I personally like the 5-to-1 method for students of your age, which is where I diverge from Dr. Huberman a bit, but he's really teaching adults. I like for every 5 minutes you work, you give yourself 1 minute of rest. Does that mean I only work 5 minutes and then I rest for a minute? No. For many students in high school, they can probably work for 50 minutes and then maybe rest for 10. Okay. Younger students in middle school might want to work for 25 minutes and rest for 5. You might need to experiment for this, but I do think it's important for you to start shorter and then work up as you progress. So if you're a ninth grader, maybe 25 to 5, up to 12th grader, maybe 50 to 10. Okay. And then how are you resting? Take a shallow nap, not a long nap, because that's going to mess up your sleep later on, or what Dr. Huberman calls a non-sleep deep rest protocol, like a yoga nidra. And that can really give your brain some rest. And then finally, and I promise this is our last super protocol slide, that night you want to think about, just like this cute koala, think about getting quality and sufficiently long, deep sleep that night and the next night and the night after, because sleep is where your brain is doing that permanent rewiring. So where I now permanently remember to conjugate the verb I speak in Italian as io parlo, tu parli, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, that's a lot of different protocols to do. And it's important to remember you don't have to do all 9 every learning session. But getting alert, getting focused from steps 1 and 2, and then your deep sleep at night are pretty much non-negotiable if you do want to rewire your brain and permanently learn something new. So I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, and I also know that this cartoon character is totally dating me. It's actually even before me, but Felix the cat used to be a cartoon that we would watch in elementary school when it would be rainy or snowy outside during recess. And Felix would have, it was actually black and white, and I never knew that this bag that he had was actually yellow until I looked it up on Google today. But Felix had this magical bag of tricks, and he would open it up and he would go in and always pull something new out, and he could do all this cool things with. So I just have a few odds and ends from my own bag of tricks to share with you before I say goodbye. So we went through that healthy mind platter, right? We talked a lot about sleep. We talked a lot about physical activity. We also talked a little bit about downtime. We didn't talk that much about connection, but connection with others is really important for not just to have a healthy, satisfying, happy life, but also to have your brain kind of function at its optimal state. I bring this up also because there isn't an epidemic of mental health issues among the younger generation right now. I see it among a lot of students I work with, much more now since the pandemic than ever before. And I've been in education for 25 years. And part of it, of course, was the pandemic, but I also think part of it has been coming because of the silos that we create through social media. It's much easier to think we're connecting with people on Snapchat or TikTok or whatever, and sometimes it's not. It's a really kind of superficial connection. One way that we can foster a connection with the people in our lives is actually hearing or listening to or watching shared stories with others. So that could mean watching a movie with your family, listening to your grandparents tell stories over about their childhood when they were, children, over dinner, over a holiday meal. Or maybe it's even listening to a friend tell a bunch of other friends something in their life. Shared narratives and stories help release oxytocin, which is a chemical in our brain. It's actually the same chemical that gets released when mothers breastfeed children. It is a very powerful chemical, and it's necessary for us to feel safe, secure, and loved. On a kind of, more sort of mundane level, if you have work that requires intense analysis, perhaps something like math homework, and I'm talking clearly during the weekend, right? Or science homework, or maybe even history homework where you're looking through different sources. Try to do that work in the first 8 hours of your day. Dr. Huberman calls this phase 1. And believe it or not, try to do that in a low ceilinged room that actually fosters that kind of intense concentration. On the other hand, if you need to do creative work, like say you have art homework, or you're, practicing your guitar or something like that, you want to do that in the second 8 hours of the day, and try to do that in a high ceilinged room, or maybe even outside. I personally love to work outside, and I will give you a little PS. I actually put the finishing touches on this PowerPoint because I consider that creative outside today, because it was a beautiful day. So hopefully as we're, the weather is nicer in our part of the country, we could do that. That's called the cathedral effect, because, cathedrals were these places where you look up and the ceilings were really high. And that is also great for kind of stimulating your creativity. And then finally, only because I'm often really shocked, to be honest, that when I teach college, I know that my students, so I teach college online as well. My students are horizontal, so they're just getting out of bed, and I know that it's 8 o'clock, but still. And then even when I'm tutoring students for SAT, or I'm tutoring them for math, they'll be on their bed. And it's really hard to, first of all, to do math in a bed. But it's even like scientifically shown that if what you're looking at is down, or if you're looking down, that you are more likely to feel sleepy. Okay. Whereas when you are looking straight out in front of you, or maybe even a little bit above eye level, you're actually going to be more alert. Now, I know it's tough because most of us have laptops these days. However, I can tell you that I have just invested in a wireless keyboard, Bluetooth keyboard, Bluetooth wireless mouse, and it's probably the best combined $30 I've ever spent, because also, again, I'm old. For me, it allows me to sit up straight, and I have my laptop propped up on 3 really thick books. And so my posture's better, but also I don't get as tired while I am at the computer, because I'm now no longer like this, hunched over. Okay, so these are really easy fixes that most of us can do, and they don't require a ton of money. So I do think it's important in order to kind of keep going. And I hear you might have some finals and regents coming up. So to learn more, first, feel free to email me at info@crimsoncoaching.com for Dr. P's top neuroscience tips for learning. If I were in the library, I would hand out a little, paper as a teacher. I love my little handouts, but I can give you a digital handout in a PDF form that has kind of top tips from this presentation today. Also, go to my YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Crimson Coaching to see previously recorded webinars about subjects like whether you should take the SAT or ACT or none at all, how to balance your college list, how to prepare for college tours, how to stand out during the admissions process, how to study, how to take notes, many, many more webinars. I probably have about 20 in total. So, and then when new ones, like this is a brand new one, when new ones go up, you will get notified if you subscribe. And also subscribing helps my channel to grow because YouTube's algorithm likes when people subscribe. And then finally, if you're a parent, feel free to sign up for my monthly newsletter. It only comes once a month. At the top of the home page of my website, crimsoncoaching.com, and you'll get alerts not only about when I'm giving upcoming talks and classes, like I have a college essay boot camp starting at Port Washington Adult Ed on May 17th. I've got SAT prep starting June 15th. But also I share the latest news in college admissions and adolescent education with a little article each month. But before we go, and I know some people often like to kind of drop off quickly after the end, I just want to again thank Jericho Public Library for sponsoring tonight's talk, to Kim Simmons, the young adult librarian, for inviting me, and to all of you for, I think most of you stayed through the whole presentation. So thank you so much. I'm Dr. P. And again, there's my website and email.